Oh, good day for your peachy update. And it is the 19th, and oh boy, Vindeman, the dishonorable colonel. Yeah, and I do mean that. He was apparently told, one of the things that's come out of the hearing so far, he was told not to take any of the commentary that he had regarding this matter to anybody else, and yet he is quite clearly the conduit to the so-called whistleblower, which occurred after that caution was given. So there's a problem there. He also didn't go to his boss, which is, that's curious. And it's going to be interesting when we get into his boss's testimony. In other words, direct report up the chain of command. And as a military officer, that's a big deal for him to go outside that. But he apparently did. And we'll have to wait and see how that all plays out. The other thing that's interesting is that he directly contradicted himself in that he claimed that there was a demand, and yet in his written deposition and such in the other documents, the word demand or whatever you'd like was he said, well, there wasn't one. And when challenged directly on that, it was clear that it was his later interpretation. In other words, he conjured in his head that there had been a demand. Well, that's a problem because that's just not his job. There is also enough going on within the threads of this testimony at this point that makes rather clear that essentially what we have is these people within the civil service, if you will, although in his case NSC, and being a military officer, there's some overlap, that these people are essentially attempting to interpret and set policy from a standpoint of foreign policy, but that isn't their job. It doesn't matter whether you disagree or agree with the foreign policy of the United States as expressed by the president. The president has the plenary authority under the Constitution to set foreign policy. And that's essentially the beginning and end of the conversation. There is a huge problem here in that regard because Vindeman apparently also testified that he does not know the identity of the whistleblower, and yet the person that he talked to was silenced from answering the question by Adam Schiff. It pretty clearly was the whistleblower. Well, there is a problem with the UCMJ when it comes to perjury. If he testified he doesn't know who it is, and he does know who it is, then he lied. And it certainly appears from the fact that he was silenced from going down that road that, in fact, that is the person who he spoke to. There have been a number of other implications raised here, but the bottom line is that this individual seems to believe that he has the right to interpret and set foreign policy. There was also a fascinating exchange about him being offered a very high position in the government. The Ukrainian defense minister. Why would the defense? Why would the Ukraine offer a serving colonel in our military the offer of being the defense minister? First off, what was a qualification for that? And you got to what the blankety blank is going on here? What is clear is this. There's an awful lot of corruption that is going on in the Ukraine, and this has been admitted during this hearing that this is a nation that's a cesspool of corruption. Big shock, right? We've all known that. So the question becomes this: is rooting this out? And oh, by the way, before I get to that, it was also admitted that there's the clear appearance of impropriety from Hunter Biden serving on the board. Nobody has said anything about that would validate that he was there because he was a highly skilled person with a lot of knowledge of Ukrainian business regulation and business practices or legal expertise, in the case of Hunter Biden, because he's an attorney, that would in some way inure to the benefit of a Ukrainian company. Yeah. So, we haven't gotten a direct well, there was a clear, obvious conflict of interest. But boy, there sure as hell is an awful lot of implication going on here. You also have Nunes, who just got done pointing out that essentially what we have here is policy disagreements. But the person implementing the policy disagreement, who he's admitted to multiple cases, didn't have the authority to implement that. You see, when you're implementing foreign policy, the president's the one that sets foreign policy. Well, that's the beginning and end of the discussion. And again, we've had the question asked, is there evidence of actual bribery? No. Again, we can't get somebody to actually say, well, I have evidence of actual bribery. And there's plenty of back and forth on, well, where'd the word demand come from? Right, which would be, the attempt to establish that if you can get there. But there's nothing that's consistent that speaks to this. The other thing that's interesting is you got the Democrats fawning all over this guy because he's got a Purple Heart and he's got a bunch of stars and bars. Well, that doesn't impress me. That you're wearing a military insignia doesn't impress me. That you got shot, thank you for your service. But I think it is important to note that there have been plenty of military officers throughout the history of this nation and other nations that may have served very honorably in terms of combat and the other things that they've done, that have gone on to undermine or attempt to destroy the administration of the government from which they later served. Now, does Vindman's conduct rise to that level? I sort of doubt it. But are there potential violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice? Yes, and those should be investigated. And if, in fact, he did violate parts of the UCMJ, he should be held to account for that throughout military justice, because that's how it's supposed to work. What I do, however, see here is nobody putting forward, again, we're told there's all this evidence of actual crimes, high crimes and misdemeanors, okay, impeachable offenses. I've yet to hear anything that reaches anywhere close to that level. What I hear is I didn't like what the president was doing. Therefore, I raised hell about it. Well, and by the way, I went around my chain of command. Now, maybe that was through an authorized path and maybe it wasn't. But that's quite interesting. So I on Twitter for a little while here, I have actually changed my name to Dishonorable Colonel, ticker guy, because I think it fits in this case. It's one of the reasons I never enlisted in the military is I suck at taking orders. I always have. I have great respect for people who understand that once you enter the military, you enter military service, you may not agree with the orders that the commander-in-chief passes down to you through your chain of command. You may not like the policy differences of that you see between what you think should happen and the way that is. But doesn't matter. Okay? You do not have the right to make that determination. You have to suck it up and implement that order unless you can find it's unlawful. Now, if it's unlawful, that's a different story. But you see, this is the problem. He's been asked specifically, was there unlawful conduct? Which, under the UCMJ, you are required. You're not only allowed, you're required to refuse, and then you go through the process and military justice, and if you're right, fine. If not, you're in deep crap. But there's no there. There is no basis for a refusal or a subterfuge-based attempt to undermine unless you can find an unlawful act in the orders that have been given to you. And I haven't heard a single assertion from the colonel or from the other witless. Neither of these witlesses have said a thing about an unlawful order, and that's the dividing line. This whole process is falling apart, folks. I'm your ticker guy, and Vindeman is having a really, really bad day.